artificial intelligence. Whether it's ChatGPT, Grammarly, Gemini, or whatever you choose, AI is quickly taking over how we write, how we think, and how we act. State Senator Tracy Pennycuick is the chair of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee. She joins us today to discuss bills before her committee and their potential impact on the citizens of the Commonwealth. My name is Steve Ulrich. Welcome to Voices of Reason. We welcome Senator Tracy Pennycuick, who represents parts of Montgomery and Berks County, to Voices of Reason today. Senator Pennycuick is the chair of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thanks for having me.
Now, I know that when you talk about communications and technology, you're talking about pretty much the electronic infrastructure around the Capitol and how legislators use it. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it extends to emerging technologies as well. So AI has been a prominent topic of discussion in my committee.
I can only imagine. I know I want to ask you about things like TikTok and social media topics when it comes to affecting our children. But I noticed there are 8 other bills in the committee right now. Could you talk about some of them and how it could impact the citizens of the Commonwealth?
Certainly. So right now, as you know, let's start with last session. We had 1213 that passed, which is Act 125 of 2024. And that was emerging. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we are the first in the country to have a specific bill that outlaws artificially created child pornography with non-consenting adults in that bill as well. And why is that important? Because today you can literally take the face of a child and put it on to the body of a full-grown adult and manipulate that image into video that creates child pornography. That was a loophole that we closed at the request of the DA's Association. They said, look, so much of the imagery that we're seeing in child pornography is artificially produced, but we don't have anything specific on the books. That really opened my eyes to what can be done with artificial intelligence. So we are looking at furthering that bill into a clarification bill that would limit that to, or would label that as a digital forgery. And that's really important because it creates a specific offense for producing and distributing a forged digital likeness, whether it's visual or audio. So a perfect example would be Joe Biden spoofed voice going out to voters in New Hampshire saying, hey, don't bother coming out. I've got this vote for the primary. So we want to make sure that that's not happening. That's really, really important. One of the things that I think is really important is I don't want to stifle innovation with AI. I want industry and I want government to be able to use AI so that anyone and everyone can improve their processes, their efficiency, their time to complete a project or a process. But I don't want AI to be used to scam Pennsylvanians. That's what's most important. So we want to put some light guardrails on it and let industry, use it to its fullest extent. But we also want to protect the consumer from the bad actors out there.
Let me follow up on that. I'm headquartered in Lancaster, and certainly the incident that occurred at Lancaster Country Day School with the images that were sent from the school certainly had to have an impact on the committee as well.
It absolutely did. And I have to tell you, the images were very disturbing because you could not tell they were not real. And if you remember back to your teen years, and you're probably about my age, we didn't have social media for a good reason. Thank goodness. But being a teenager is hard. You're awkward. You're trying to figure out your emotions and what you're doing with your life and this gangly body that you're growing into. And then to have images of yourself, portrayed on an adult body. I mean, that's just got to be so emotionally damaging. And we don't need to, expose our children to that. We need to protect our kids from that. So one of the bills that is in my committee is requiring social media platforms to take down those images as soon as they're notified. So far, the social media platforms have been very, very cooperative on, as soon as they're notified of an inappropriate image, they take it down. But, we don't know what the future will bring for social media platforms. So we want to make sure that we've got it codified into law that, hey, look, if there's a picture that's inappropriate, you're notified, you take it down within 48 hours. To me, that's common sense legislation that protects our children.
Is this something you see coming out of committee fairly quickly and receiving bipartisan support?
I absolutely do. AI and communications and technology seems to be a very bipartisan issue. I don't know anyone who says, no, 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 that doesn't fit my party's platform. I think everyone looks at it as very common sense, very practical. And at the end of the day, we all want to protect our children, regardless of what party you're in.
Well, not only are you protecting the children, but I know Senate Bill 112 talks about protecting consumer information and data privacy as well, right?
Absolutely. And, I had the data breach bill last session where if whether it's a government agency or whether it's a private entity that breaches your data, you get a year of free credit monitoring. And that's really important because today with just a snippet of information, someone can, spoof your identity and take out all kinds of credit and do all kinds of nefarious things. So we want to make sure people are protected that way as well. We are also looking at an AI disclosure bill because I think it's important. If you are creating content, whether you're writing a screenplay, writing a book, acting in a movie, you want to get credit for what you're actually doing. But at the same time, we want to acknowledge when AI plays a part in that production of whether it's a movie, whether it's a book, whether it's a paper for all those college kids that are using Chat GPT. We want to make sure that credit is given where credit is deserved. If it's AI produced, it needs to be notified. Just a disclosure. We looked at a watermarking bill. That probably won't go anywhere because if we watermarked everything that had AI in it, our entire life would be a watermark. I
Right.
mean, the evening news is, or the weather report is AI generated. We can't. So we've got to have some common sense in there. So we will be having a disclosure bill come through, but probably not the watermark bill.
You mentioned my age in particular, that I didn't have social media when I was going to school. How important has it been to have, I'll describe them as youngsters, whether it's Senator Miller, Senator Picozzi, as members of the committee? What is their unique perspective brought to the committee?
I have to tell you, they are so much more up to date on all the social media. I mean, as they said, oh, you're on the old platform, Facebook and Instagram. They're on TikTok. They do the Snapchat, which is great. But they do bring a very, very unique perspective on what those social platforms can be used for. But at the same time, they are also very, very aware of what bad actors can do on those platforms and how they can influence youth and how subtle messaging can come through. So they've been very, very informative and great about educating all us older folks, if you will, on some of the challenges of the new platforms coming out. So especially TikTok,
Right.
a lot of them live on TikTok, and we have a bill to remove TikTok from government devices. I think that's okay. You shouldn't be using TikTok on a government issued device. Now, if you want to use it on your private device, go for it. No problems with that. But I think the government does have a higher obligation to protect not only the user, but also our infrastructure and our access to data. So I think that's a smart move.
Yeah, let me follow up on the TikTok discussion because I know you'll always hear opponents of any bill talk about the slippery slope. And if you ban it
Mhm.
on government-owned devices, would eventually lead to consumer ban. And certainly that's
Correct.
that before the federal government. How do you feel about the idea of the slippery slope?
So I'm very aware of the slippery slope, and I do keep that in the back of my head. We know that it is a Chinese-owned company. We know that they do data mine off your phone. If you want to have that on your phone, even though you know those are some risks, that's your decision. I don't think that we should regulate that decision. I think it's important on a government device that we put some parameters on. When I was in the military, there were certain things we couldn't have on our phones. Made good sense because that phone was accessing government databases. So that made good sense. But I honestly believe, I know the federal government is looking at purchasing or having someone in the US purchase TikTok so that we can secure that access. But what you do on your personal device is your business.
let me ask you about a couple other bills. Senate Bill 431, which talks about amending the Right to Know Act. And certainly, as you talk about sunshine and transparency in not only state government, but federal government, that comes into play. What is the genesis behind 431?
So 431 does not diminish the right to know. It takes those bad actors out that are just filing right to knows for commonly accessible information. What are your opening hours? What area do you serve? Those are just kind of a clog the system, if you will, and they are AI generated. And those are not, they're not looking for actual right to know requests. They're just hampering a small municipality's ability or small agency's ability to answer right to knows that are valid. And I've seen some of these right to knows that come in, and you can tell they're artificially generated because it's information you could get off the website if you really wanted it.
Right.
So not really, not truly a right to know request.
Does the Communications and Technology Committee work with, I don't know, state government committee to look at what's going on with elections today in particular and the
Yep.
move among the around the Commonwealth to modernize Pennsylvania elections, I guess is the best way to put it.
I know, absolutely. And so there's a couple things that we are doing to make sure that our elections are not interfered with using AI. And one of the things that's really important is you cannot have an artificially produced campaign advertisement which would misrepresent or impersonate a candidate. And that's really important because we want to make sure that there's not any manipulation close to the election day. And that would be, like I previously said about the Joe Biden example. Also, it's not a criminal, but a civil lawsuit. So it can get to court quickly and be adjudicated very, very quickly. So there can also be court fines that are as a result of that nefarious act. But AI can do so many things in elections, and that makes me nervous. I'll be honest, it really does, because you can misrepresent what someone says with 10 seconds of their voice. You can just duplicate their voice. So it's really important, and that's why we went with civil um, repercussions, because it's quick. You can get it before a judge and get it stopped very, very quickly. Get civilian or civil fines very, very quickly. And we wanted to make sure that our elections were not hampered by any artificial produced influences, whether it be advertisements of voice, whatever.
No, I appreciate that. I think there are a lot of people out there that are listening to this that do understand it, but I've seen podcasts that are being created with no human voices. And
It's crazy. It is absolutely insane what can be done. And once you see it, it makes you kind of take a step back and go, I think I'll just go into my bank and ask the question versus doing the chat bot. I get real old fashioned real quick because it makes me nervous, because I'm not familiar with it. But the more I see it, the more I use it, the better understanding I have of where we need to kind of put the left and right guardrails on. We have really done a deep dive on AI, and we've really gotten very educated between myself, my chief of staff, my ledge director, and we all three came to the same conclusion. Look, this is a great tool, but it is just a tool. And we need to protect consumers from those that would use that tool to take money away, hurt them in any way, shape, or form. So we want to make sure that people are protected from the bad actors. And there's always bad actors. You just can't seem to get away from it. It used to be the email from the Nigerian prince that needed $50,000. And, now they can spoof and it's your grandchild, being arrested or, whatever. And my mom's in her 80s and she almost fell prey to something really similar. And just by happenstance, one of the nurse's aides was like, Becky, you don't own a car. Oh, oh yeah, you're right. I don't own a car, because they were calling to update her information on her car insurance. And it was like, ah. So that's where my concern comes in, is that, people that aren't familiar with the technology will be duped, but we're going to do our best to make sure that doesn't happen.
no, I'm sure this doesn't happen in your office. Your legislative director doesn't use ChatGPT to help write bills
He
or anything like
totally does.
that. But are you hearing about things like that in Harrisburg? Is
We are
AI
hearing that
being
college kids do it all the time.
used?
Yeah, I hear that a lot, that people are using Chat GPT for different speeches or different verbiage, but actually, it is a good tool, but you have to remember it's a tool. It doesn't replace a human. It doesn't solve the world's problems. You just have to, kind of use it with that in mind. But I will tell you, I just recently toured PA Biotech up in Doylestown, and they said that they've been able to use artificial intelligence for modeling in clinical trials. So instead of 8 years of clinical trials, they're doing 3 because they're modeling the other 5 years of testing, which is huge. Think of the money that we're saving and how much faster we can get innovation and technology out into the marketplace with that. So that's a good part of AI. I will also tell you that AI is being used in medical in regards to a mammogram. I had my mammogram. At the bottom of the letter, it says your mammogram was evaluated using artificial intelligence, which piqued my interest. Come to find out, if they scan your mammogram using artificial intelligence, they can catch breast cancer 5 years earlier, which means you're catching it a lot sooner, which means less aggressive treatment, higher rates of success, and you live longer. I mean, where there's no downtime there. There's no downside there. So I think, when you look at that, you go, oh, that's great. I mean, that saves lives. That's really important.
So let me get you out here on this one. So we've talked about that's a lot of good that AI can do, but also we talked about the social media protections for children. And
Yes.
when do we overstep our bounds as parents and grandparents? When do we draw the line and say this is for your protection?
So there's a couple of bills that have been floating around, and one of them is to turn the devices off for children under 14, so they couldn't get to adult content. I also think parents in some states have had the ability to say, no, I want to validate my child's social media accounts with their age, have oversight. But I think in today's environment, parents have got to be involved and parents have to be on top of social media. And one of my former colleagues does not allow his children to have social media. So what they do is they take dad's phone and they change the name on dad's phone and then they'll get on social media, which I think is hysterical. So, I understand that. I think social media puts so much pressure on kids to be a certain way, to act a certain way, to think a certain way. I think the best thing a parent can do is know their kid and know what's best for their child and say, look, you're not going to be on social media, or you're going to be on social media, but I'm going to be on your account too, or I'm going to be able to see everything on your account. I was very lucky. My kids hit social media as they were kind of graduating from high school,
Oh,
but we also lived overseas. So they didn't really have any access. They came back, they were in college and they had access. But um, I think as parents, you got to be involved. You got to know what's going on. You got to see what they're doing on social media because there's a lot of bullying. There's a lot of peer pressure, and gone are the days where you sent your kid out just to play in the backyard till the streetlights came on. That doesn't happen anymore. But I think it's important that parents have that ability to control what their kids are doing on social media and see what they're doing on social media and ask questions and have conversations. And as my husband will tell you, oh, I don't want to talk about that, but you have to talk about it with your kids and you got to be open. And because if you're not going to tell them what the answer is, they're going to find the answer from their peers. And that's not always the right answer. So you want to be able to have the tough conversations with your kids.
and that is a perfect way to wrap things up. Senator Tracy Pennycuick represents the 24th Senatorial District covering Montgomery and Berks County. Senator, thanks so much for joining us today on Voices of Reason.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.